Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will go ahead and get started. So my name is Becky Scott. I'm a program officer with the International Fisheries Conservation Project at the Ocean Foundation. A major focus of our work is promoting the development and adoption of management procedures, also known as harvest strategies, at both tuna and general RFMOs. As part of our ongoing work, we operate harveststrategies.org, an online platform that serves as a comprehensive resource for everything related to management procedures. We're honored to be working with the FAO's Common Oceans Program, funded by the Global Environment Facility on the ABNJ Tuna 2 project. ABNJ refers to areas beyond national jurisdiction, better known as the high seas, and the project's main aim is to secure sustainable fishing of all major tuna stocks by 2027. Implementing effective management procedures is central to achieving this objective. Today's event is the 10th in a series of 16 quarterly webinars we're hosting over the course of this 4-year project, and the focus of today's session is special considerations and approaches for multi-stock MSEs. We'll be featuring a distinguished panel of 4 experts from around the world to share challenges posed by fisheries that catch multiple stocks or species, as well as solutions for designing management procedures to serve as a comprehensive approach to the management of these more complex systems. The format of today's webinar will include 4 short presentations, followed by a 30-minute panel discussion and Q&A. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphone muted and camera off unless you are speaking. We are offering interpretation in English, Spanish, and French. You can access this by clicking the interpretation globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, but note that this may be hidden within the More menu indicated by the 3 dots in the circle. We'll hold all questions until the Q&A session at the end. At that point, feel free to use the raise your hand function to ask your question live, or you can submit it at any time via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel shortly after the event. So without further ado, I'd like to get us started and introduce our first speaker. We'll begin today's webinar with a presentation from Dr. Gorka Marino, a principal researcher at ASTI and the vice chairperson of the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission's Scientific Committee. He'll be speaking about the ongoing efforts to develop a multi-stock MSE framework for Atlantic tropical tunas. And so with that, I will pass the floor to you, Dr. Marino.
Good morning, Becky. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gorka Merino, and I will be presenting the work we've been doing for developing a multi-stock MSE for the Atlantic tropical tunas. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And then just after your confirmation, Becky, I will start.
Yep, that looks great.
Yep. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to present the key features and assumptions of the MSE we've been developing for Atlantic tropical tunas. This work has been mostly developed with colleagues from ASTI, the model developers, and the whole team of the Tuna Research Group in ASTI. So as an introduction, let me just set the scene for tropical tunas in the Atlantic. The current status of the stock is quite good. They are estimated to be not overfished and not subject to overfishing. These are the latest results of our stock assessments in the COVID diagrams we use in ICAT to characterize the status of stocks. So in green, you've got the area where the biomass is above the BMSY, the maximum sustainable yield. And in the vertical axis, you've got the fishing mortality relative to FMSY. So if this fishing mortality is lower than FMSY, we will be also in the green area. So the idea is that the 3 stocks are, as I was saying, in a sustainable status, and there needs to be some transition to a more, let's say, stable and precautionary framework for the management of these stocks. Currently, although there are some catch recommendations for yellowfin and skipjack, the TAC or allocation of the catch limits has only been happening for big eye. And the idea is that this happens for the other stocks as well. In recent years, we have seen quite high catches of yellowfin and skipjack. And for big eye, after a period where we estimated that the stock was overfished, we have just confirmed the recovery this year, and the TACs have increased last year, and it may be that they are also increased this year. So why multi-stock was necessary for these fisheries? Basically because poor seine, longline, and bait boat, that represent 96% of the total catch of tropical tunas, often fish these stocks simultaneously. And this is particularly evident for poor seine fleets. This is the left triangle here. This is a triangle that compares or estimates for each one of the sets on fats what is the proportion of skipjack, yellowfin, and big eye. So we can see that in the majority of the sets, in the catch, we have about 70 or 80% of skipjack, about 10 and 20% on yellowfin, and likewise between 10 and 5 for big eye. Therefore, it's very difficult to achieve the regulations for each one of the stocks if these are set independently, for example, with independent catch limits. So we have built the MSE under the assumption that there is some technical interaction for those gears that fish the three stocks together. So these technical interactions make it impossible to achieve the same objective for the three stocks. Okay, so now let me briefly talk you about the components of this simulation framework, the MSE framework. This has been built using FLBeya. This is a software that has been internally developed in ASTI that has a similar components of the other MSEs. So there's some operating models that represent the true and unknown dynamics of the system, from which we generate data, in this case simulated data, with which we, together with an estimator, we can perceive the status of the stock. And based on this perception, there are a series of decision rules or harvest control rules that are used to set the management advice, in this case, catch limits for the three stocks. These catch limits are distributed among fleets, looking at the historical share of the total catch between the different fleets, and the effort is adjusted in order to fulfill the TAC for each one of the stocks. So the operating models are mostly or are all conditioned from the latest stock synthesis stock assessments. So we have a factorial grid composed by 9 models for yellowfin from the assessment in 2024. And we characterize the uncertainty with high, medium, and low natural mortalities, and likewise with stiffness. For big eye, in this case, we are using the assessment of 2021, although there was a new assessment this year. But the uncertainty grid is composed of 27 models with, again, alternatives of high, medium, and low levels of natural mortality, stiffness, and variability of recruitment, the sigma R. And for the skipjack assessment, based on the files from the 2023 assessment, we have 18 models, high, medium, and low levels of stiffness and growth, and two alternative CPUEs for the juveniles of skipjack, basically from poor seines operating on fats, and also of some buoys, some signal we get from the ecosonder buoys used in the fats. Then we have also developed some robustness operating models related to the potential impact of climate change, whether they will increase or decrease the baseline productivity, the R0 for these stocks. A particular feature of this stock, of this MSE, is that we had to develop the stock assessments in 2021, 22, and 2023 in order to make them compatible. In other ways, the same fleets we have defined, or the same fishery description we have assumed for each one of the stocks needed to be compatible. So we developed we identified some common fleets that fish the three stocks together. And as you can see here, they're mostly poor seines, bait boat, and longline fleets, although there are some handlines and some rod and reel from the US. So the idea was to identify which one of those fish the three stocks simultaneously. Now, another particular feature is the observation error model. Is the model we use to generate data from the operating model into the management procedure. And this is particular because we built this model based on the statistical properties of the feeds of the historical CPUs in the estimation period during the stock assessments. We look for the autocorrelation of residuals of these feeds, potential bias and variability, and from the we generate estimated, spawning stock biomass and number of individuals and CPU observations. So the idea is that each time management is simulated in the management procedure, the historical CPU is recalculated. It's something similar that we do when we re-standardize CPUs for each one of the assessments. This is slightly different to other MSEs we've seen, for example, in ICAT, where the historical values of the CPUs are not modified. Maybe because some of them are surveys and these are often not standardized. And when generating those CPUs, we still maintain the selectivity and catchability from the fleets as in the original stock synthesis files. Now, let me briefly talk to you about the components of the management procedure. So we've got data, a model to estimate the status of the stock, and harvest control rules for the 3 stocks. With regards to data, we generate catch and CPU data from the operating models. The estimator is a surplus production model, in this case SPICT, that is used to estimate the status of the stock relative to its MSY benchmarks. And then we have a series of harvest control rules. Here you can see them in the figure on the right, with alternatives for the F target and the B threshold. The B limit, an interim limit reference point was adopted by ICAT in 2024, so we haven't changed this. So at the end, the harvest control rules are different combinations of F targets and B triggers. We also implement a maximum TAC limit and a stability clause so that the TAC for each one of the stocks doesn't fluctuate that much between management periods. This is a figure of how this will work in our system. So we will have one management procedure for big eye, another one for skipjack, another one for yellowfin. From the harvest control rule, we will set a TAC for each one of the stocks. And looking at the historical share of the different fleets for each one of the stocks, we will assign some share of the total TAC to each one of the fleets. And we estimate what will be the fishing effort to achieve these quotas. Then we will get the minimum fishing effort of those 3. Basically, this will be the effort required to fulfill the TAC for the most restrictive stock or the stock that is in worse condition, more or less the same idea of the choke species that is used in the ICES and other management frameworks. And with this fishing effort, we will estimate the real catch for each one of the stocks. So this is how the simulations work, but something that is important to highlight is what is the management advice that will go from the scientific committees to the commission. And this will be nothing but the TAC that will come from each one of the independent MPs. So to summarize, this assumption of the minimum effort drives the simulations, but the TAC that will be provided to the commission every 3 years will come from the independent MPs. This one is a snapshot of the trial specification document that is uploaded in the ICAT MSE website. You can check it, where we provide all the technical details of this MSE, the operating models, the stock assessments, the description of the management procedures, the performance metrics we use, and some preliminary results. So I invite you to look at this if you are interested and nothing else. So the summary of this presentation would be that the TACs in this MSE framework will be calculated from the MP for the 3 stocks. Technical interactions make it impossible to achieve the TAC for the 3 stocks, and then in the simulations, fleets will adapt their effort to fulfill the TAC of the most restrictive stock, and this will affect their catch of the other two stocks. And then we will explore the trade-offs between long-term catch, conservation objectives, and many others. We, of course, are considering options to add realism to this simulation framework, basically because the operators say that they are still able to design their fishing operations so that if they are reaching their TAC or the catch limit for big eye, for example, they can look for areas or sets where they know that the proportion of yellowfin and skipjack is higher. So we would have to explore how we add some realism there. We have the trial specification document, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gorka, for that excellent overview of your ongoing work on Atlantic tropical tunas. So next, we will turn to the Western and Central Pacific Ocean with a presentation from Dr. Finley Scott, a senior fisheries scientist at the Pacific Community, or SPC. Dr. Scott will be providing us with an overview of his work with the mixed fishery framework in the Western and Central Pacific Ocean. So take it away, Dr. Scott.
Hi, and good evening or good morning, wherever you are. It's evening here. It's about 9:30. So if I yawn, I apologize. Let me just remove that control. Yeah, so my name is Finley Scott. I work for the Pacific Community, or SPC, and this presentation is about some of the mixed fishery work that we've been doing with the WCPFC on tuna stocks in the Western and Central Pacific Ocean. First of all, just a really short introduction about sort of who we work for. So the Pacific Community is the principal scientific and technical organization in the Pacific region. And we have 27 member Pacific Island countries and territories, and also some non-Pacific Island countries and territories members, such as the United Kingdom. We have 5 sites that are sprinkled around the Pacific, and the main headquarters is in Noumea, New Caledonia, which is where I am at the moment. And as well as doing the work for our members, the SPC's Oceanic Fisheries Program is also the scientific services provider for the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission, which covers this large area here. There's a little bit of overlap with the IATTC convention area and the Eastern Pacific Ocean, but we're really focusing around here. So we are the tuna RFMO in the Western and Central Pacific Ocean, and the convention area covers about 20% of the Earth's surface. The main tuna stocks are skipjack, big eye, yellowfin, and albacore. And there's also interest, of course, with North Pacific albacore and Pacific bluefin, which is sort of looked after by the Northern Committee. The tuna catch from the WCPO region is about 3 million tons in 2024, which was a record for the time series that we have dating back to 1970. And this is about 85% of the total Pacific tuna catch and about 54% of the global tuna catch. And I think interestingly for us, we've got about 80% of that tuna catch occurs in the waters of coastal states. And that means we have a huge array of different members and stakeholders, which are all listed down at the bottom. And interestingly for us for this presentation, in 2014, the WCPFC agreed to adopt a work plan to develop harvest strategies for WCPO tuna. And that is where we come in and start to talk about mixed fisheries. So SPC is developing harvest strategies for WCPO, skipjack, big eye, yellowfin, and South Pacific albacore. And these 4 stocks are caught by an overlapping mix of fisheries with different gears in overlapping regions. And this, of course, means that management measures that are aimed at one particular stock can therefore have impacts on other stocks. And this is obviously an important consideration when we're developing harvest strategies, and we need to account for these mixed fishery interactions. And this is a figure taken from a WCPFC paper from 2013, which I think tries to describe the different species down here and what gear types are catching them. And we just have this big sort of kludge of spaghetti going on in the middle, which makes it impossible to work out what's really going on, which is probably the point of the figure. To further illustrate the mixed fishery situation we have, this is for each of those 4 tuna stocks, kind of how the catches are broken down by gear. So for skipjack, obviously the catches are occurring in this tropical region, and blue is catches by purseine. So the majority of the catch around here is by purseine, and yellow is the other fisheries, which is predominantly in the waters of Indonesia, Philippines, and also with Vietnam. And the other fisheries are a lot of that is in the archipelagic water component as well, which is outside of the realm of the WCPFC. Moving over to yellowfin, you see, yes, there's still some catch from the purseine in the tropical area, but there's really quite a big chunk taken by those other fisheries particularly in the Indonesian archipelagic waters. Big eye, we have quite a big chunk of purseine, but we also have quite a lot of longline being taken in this tropical region. There is some other happening over in Indonesia, and notably there's sort of very little longline catch that is happening south of 10 South. And finally, with South Pacific albacore, it's nearly all taken by longline, and most of that is happening by what we call here the southern longline, which is south of 10 South, but there's also an element of troll fishing going on as well. Trying to summarize all that, we can look at the mean proportion of catches by weight over, we probably ought to update this period that we have here, where we have for each of the rows, we have the stock, and then sort of what proportion of the catch is taken by that particular gear. And so we see that for skipjack, most of it is taken by the purseine fishery, but there's also some pole and line and some of this other fishery, and other is the domestic fisheries of Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines. Whereas for albacore, most of it is taken by the southern longline fishery, which is the longlines operating south of 10 South. There are some in what we call the tropical longline, so the 10 South to 20 North region, and there's also some troll fishery. So we note that for skipjack and albacore, these are sort of dominated by one fishery, so purseine for skipjack and southern longline for albacore, but there's very little interaction really between these 2 stocks. But that isn't the case with big eye, because we can see, and also for yellowfin, so for big eye, there are some purseine catch. There's quite a chunk from the tropical longline and some with other. And for yellowfin, so over half of it is the purseine catch, and about a third of it is the other fisheries. And again, predominantly, or a lot of it is in the archipelagic waters. It's worth noting, of course, that for big eye, a lot of the purseine catch is on the free school. Sorry, I was on the associated and fad fishing for big eye, and very little for the free school and unassociated purseine. So the current approach that we are taking with the WCPFC is that the scientific committee agreed in 2019 that we would investigate this multi-species approach, as it is being called. And one of the key issues that we were trying to avoid sort of a spatial overlap between the different management procedures and the fisheries. And just noting again, noting that management procedure here, we mean sort of data collection plus estimation method and harvest control rule. So reassuringly similar to Gorka's definition, but I just note that different tuna RFMOs have different terminology for us. So just wanted to be clear there. So the approach we're taking is based on single stock management procedures, where each management procedure only considers the status of a single stock, and each fishery is only managed through a single management procedure, but a management procedure can manage multiple fisheries. And it's worth highlighting that this is seen as an initial approach. So this is currently being investigated. And if it looks like it's not going to be appropriate, then some alternative approach is going to have to be developed. In line with the WCPFC Harvest Strategy Work Plan, the initial focus was on developing management procedures for skipjack and South Pacific albacore, because as I mentioned on the previous slide, they sort of have a single dominant fishery and that there's limited interaction between these stocks. So trying to put this together, we're sort of going to go stock by stock and sort of fishery by fishery, and I will attempt to slowly build up this table. Down here we have the different fishery components, and across here we have the different stocks. So starting with skipjack, we know that skipjack is taken by the tropical purseine, but also by pole and line and these domestic fisheries of Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And under this approach, those three fishery segments would be managed exclusively through the skipjack management procedure. Moving over onto albacore, we know that it's taken by the southern longline and the southern troll fishery, but there's also some catch from that tropical longline fishery. And under this approach, we put the southern longline and the southern troll to be managed through the albacore management procedure. But when we are developing this, which we are at the moment, we need to make some kind of assumption about what is going on with albacore catches by that tropical longline fishery, noting that recent catches are about 12% of albacore catches taken by that tropical longline fishery. Should have further specified that in that bullet. Moving on to big eye, well, we know it's taken by purseine and longline and pole and line and the other, but we've already said that the purseine and the pole and line and the other is under the management procedure for skipjack, and the southern longline has been managed through the albacore MP. So that leaves the tropical longline to be managed through the big eye MP. And this is where I think perhaps the limitations of this approach become sort of fairly obvious. It's, potentially need to reevaluate the albacore MP when the big eye MP has been agreed, because the albacore is also caught by some tropical longline, which would be managed through that big eye MP. There also may be some need to consider the FAD closure period, particularly on its impact for big eye, and that is a separate discussion, and that will largely impact the big eye stock. Then moving finally on to yellowfin, well, this situation puts us here where there is no dedicated management procedure for yellowfin. So in fact, all of the fisheries that take yellowfin are going to be managed through the management procedures for the other stocks. And that, of course, means that the stock status of yellowfin is not directly considered by these single stock management procedures, and therefore there would be a need for enhanced monitoring of yellowfin. For example, perhaps a change to the frequency of assessment and development of indicators and so on. But just because there isn't a management procedure for yellowfin, there is still a need to perform these sort of harvest strategy evaluations for yellowfin to work out what the combined impact of the different MPs would be, particularly to assess the probability of achieving these different management objectives. It's also worth noting that the fisheries in archipelagic waters are not managed through the WCPFC harvest strategies, and that is something which has a particular impact again on yellowfin. So trying to put all this together, I've tried to put this diagram together. I'm not sure how helpful it turns out to be, but starting off with the skipjack stock, we say that we have a skipjack management procedure which considers the stock status of skipjack, and that sets the fishing opportunities for the purseine, the domestic fisheries, and the pole and line fisheries. And this is the domestic fisheries of Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, outside of that archipelagic water. Over here we have albacore, which has an albacore management procedure, which sets the fishing opportunities for the southern longline and the troll fishery, and these two are pretty much independent of each other. Moving over to big eye, we have the big eye management procedure, which would set the fishing opportunities for the tropical longline, which we know fishes the big eye stock. But we know that big eye is also affected by what is going on with the skipjack management procedure through the purseine, domestic fisheries, and pole and line. And it's also affected, but only a small component, by what is happening with the southern longline, which is managed through the albacore MP. And it goes the other way, where actually what's going on with the big eye MP is setting the fishing opportunities which may impact albacore. And finally, we have yellowfin, which is fished by absolutely everybody, but does not have a dedicated management procedure, including the archipelagic waters as well. So why have we taken this approach? Well, the initial thought was that this sort of offered multi-stock complexity, but within a tractable modeling framework, because we only have sort of a single stock management procedures rather than having a management procedure which tries to consider the status of multiple stocks. And this made it sort of technically feasible from where we are at the moment. There was also thinking that it made the sequential decision making more easily for managers, particularly when we start off by saying, let's develop the skipjack management procedure and then move on to the South Pacific albacore management procedure and then with Big Eye. And this allows iterative science management discussions to be maintained. But we've seen that some of the big limitations are that yellowfin and big eye are taken by a mix of fisheries that are managed through other management procedures or are in archipelagic waters. So really there's two sort of key questions. The first one for big eye is that if these are the different fisheries on this row that are taking big eye, and it's only managing the tropical longline, is this sort of 27% of recent catch, is that a big enough like lever by which you can sort of manage the big eye stock and achieve its objectives? And even more importantly, can the yellowfin objectives be achieved when there is no dedicated management procedure for it? There's a whole load of other stuff about monitoring, but I do not have the time to go into that at the moment. So finally, what is the state of play with this initial approach? We have a skipjack interim management procedure that was adopted in 2022. The South Pacific albacore management procedure is currently under development. Possibly, I'm cautiously optimistic for adoption by the end of this year. Big Eye, the MP, is scheduled for adoption by the end of next year. So we're going to do additional work for the operating models there. And then for yellowfin, again, there's operating models needed for next year, and then sort of hopefully testing the full combined modeling framework by the end of next year. And finally, just say thank you very much for New Zealand for funding this work, and I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Finley, for that great presentation. We'll now move to a presentation by Dr. Jim Iannelli, a senior scientist at NOAA, who will walk us through considerations for MSE frameworks for multi-species fisheries, including technical interactions and human behavior. So over to you, Dr. Iannelli.
Thank you, Becky. Take it. You can sound check and see my screen.
Yep.
Okay?
I can hear you great. We don't see your screen yet, though.
Okay.
There we go. That looks great.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Going to shift gears a little bit. This is outside of the tuna world, but hopefully an example of some multi-species management that was done as part of a continuing project. Quite a bit different backdrop from what we've seen so far today in the context of it's a single entity, mostly Alaskan waters, where I'll be speaking from, but fairly complicated fisheries and fairly complicated management system. The other big difference from and a major luxury that we have is extensive data that we'll be able to see. And I just want to acknowledge the groups of people that have worked on this. A lot of this was done through different stages in history. And I just wanted to start out with acknowledgement that we have evolved this program to deal more with the changing environmental conditions through this Alaska Climate Integrated Modeling Project, which is taking into account some very excellent oceanographic models that are tied to climate change, and then linking those with ecosystem models, both trophic and technical interactions, and then the socioeconomic aspects as well. So what I'm going to be talking about is quite a bit different than the tuna world, but hopefully can provide some perspective. As you all know, all fisheries have technical interactions. You target your main species, be it skipjack or big eye, you'll catch other things. And this is very much the case for groundfish, which I'll be speaking to. In Alaska, we do groundfish assessments nearly every year for a number of species, and they are all monitored and have effects, and they're constrained based on our fishery management plan, which is abbreviated FMP. But we have lots of other aspects of our fisheries that are controlled, and some of them are directly related to the abundance estimates that we might have for those. Others are protected species that are limited based on basically conservation for other fisheries. And some of these species you'll know about, but I'm not going to spend too much time delving into that. Just to give a little bit of history on that, in our system in the US, we have fairly National Environmental Policy Act and NEPA Act, which governs how we manage our fisheries. And in Alaska, we've had, like I said, lots of success with getting the data and information straightforward from the get-go. And this project is long standing. Back when we first said, well, how are you managing fisheries in Alaska? And doing it in a multi-species context, we had to come up with a way of evaluating that. And that's the beginning of my involvement, was in the early 2000s to develop a basic way to evaluate the complexity of the different species that are caught. And I'll touch on a couple of the developments. The major work, the original work I did was heavily updated in 2018 by Kotaro Ono. So he deserves the lion's share of credit to make this a proper full feedback loop in terms of how the management aspects worked. And then more recently, we've had a postdoc continuing this development, Sophia Wasserman. So our FMP in Alaska, so we've been looking at maps below all of this, but this is the state of Alaska and the large marine ecosystem that is the Eastern Bering Sea. Characteristics that has a 2 million ton limit of total groundfish species that can be taken in a year. We consider that an ecosystem kind of overarching limit. And then for all of the different species, we have acceptable biological catches, and the sum of those typically exceeds 2 million tons. And then we have other things on halibut bycatch limits. And so our MSE that we do is typically done to evaluate, well, what would happen, for example, if some of the prohibited species catch limits were to change. And so that's where those types of things fit in, just to introduce a couple of the species that we've constrained. You'll see there's, this is the paper I was referring to, which Kotaro did, that updated how decisions are affected within our system, and the closed loop simulation that he introduced and improved upon greatly, but basically split apart the operating model, a completely independent estimation model, full age structured one that you'll see. And then our management model is how we would come up with the catch limits and the quota allocations. The operating model, like I said, is age structured. We have, almost 100% observer coverage for all of the gear types, and just the simulation testing that was done is, basically winding up the ecosystem with over 50 years and then evaluating things over 15 years. And the estimation model provides the constraints as defined in our fishery management plan, the FMP. Just to define the fisheries themselves, Kotaro was able to go through and look at the characteristics and basically came up with area and gear type characteristics. So if you're fishing with one type of gear in a certain area which species will you be catching, and those types of things. And that's how he defines our métiers for those fisheries. And then our management model was to mimic the process of selecting TACs for each of the stocks. And so the way our system works is every year we have assessments that are either updated, perhaps new assessments, and typically with new luxurious survey data, fishery independent survey data that gives us things that we can tune our assessments to. And then among those, we have a set of constraints. And this is where the managers, basically the council, will come and decide, well, given externalities like a catch limit of, in this case, Pacific halibut of over 4,000 tons, how does that fix the array of other species? And so that's kind of the summary of that. And then just to step through the equation side of it, it's basically the things that we estimate are the constraints on basically finding the values that optimize the across the catch and the value of the fishery, sorry, or the value of the species. And so so we have one constraint is that across all métiers, what is the value that actually satisfies being below the acceptable biological catch limit, which we determine from our assessments. And then what about prohibited species caps? There's a number of these that can play into it. In this case, it's the halibut prohibited species catch is a external constraint. And then we have the what we call the optimum yield hard cap, which I said before is 2 million tons, but for the case I'm going to present, it adds up to about 1.7 million for the subset of species that we presented here. And then there's some limits on how much the fleets can expand and contract. So the point is to come up with a way that we try to be realistic about how the fleet behaves as far as responding to changes in species abundance and environmental conditions, but also in market conditions and what's available for that. And the technique is a linear programming approach, which just typically is what I showed in the previous slide, talking about constrained optimization to try to basically mimic again how the managers would pick which stocks is most valuable, which ones can be caught without having too much impact on other stocks, and so on. So that's kind of the framework. And as far as the MSE output goes, this is some updated work with a slightly different array of species. Obviously, just a single simulation scenario here, but looking at the effects of that for the 4 main stocks. And then if you actually start to look at the aggregate of simulations, you can see that in millions of tons, the catch for pollock under different scenarios is constraining the amount of cod that can be taken. Cod's like one of the most important stocks for target species. This is Pacific cod. And you can see when the limit on pollock decreases or goes lower, than the cod at the margins will be increasing. And then yellowfin sole is the largest flatfish fishery in the world, and that doesn't seem to be so correlated with the pollock catch limits. And so one of the aspects that we looked at was how environmental changes are affecting these things, and the trade-offs that we see with those between pollock abundance and halibut bycatch limits. So what Sophia did was take a ways of running an MSE with really favorable and unfavorable conditions for productivity of pollock, since that seems to be one of the main drivers of the groundfish fisheries in Alaska, and then how constraints on halibut bycatch might affect things. And I won't go into too much of the detail here, but we tested different techniques. That's the difference between the dash line and the solid lines here. In this case, for productivity scenarios, that if pollock productivity scenarios changed in the future, how would it affect other stocks in our system? And then same for bycatch constraints. So are there choke species if you lower the bycatch limit of Pacific halibut? In this case, it has pretty large impacts on cod and somewhat on pollock. But if it, compared to the, basically 10,000 tons would be a lot of bycatch, and that's kind of the trade-offs are meant to be shown there. And just so one of the things I'll just wrap up with is that we really have a pretty luxurious system. I mentioned that we have very high observer coverage. The monitoring systems are extensive, and the council's pretty much involved in every aspect of our management system on an annual basis. And so with that, I'll look forward to seeing if this applies in any context with the tuna situations that we've been looking at. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim. That was a great presentation. To round up our lineup of experts, we will now move to Dr. Dorleta Garcia, a senior researcher at ASTI and the vice chair of the ICES Advisory Committee, who will be providing a perspective on advancing ecosystem-based fisheries management efforts using mixed fisheries models. So over to you, Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Becky. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Now sharing. Let me see if it works. It should. Okay, can you see my presentation now?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay, so as Becky said, I'm Dorleta Garcia, and as Gorka, I work in ASTI, partly also in ICES, but my work is focused in ICES. No tunas in this presentation neither. And I will focus in the mixed fisheries considerations in ICES and the work we have done in the Seawise project, a research project that finished just 2 weeks ago. So what was Seawise about? It was about advancing towards the operationalization of ecosystem-based fisheries management. And how? The idea was to use the already existing structures that are used routinely to provide advice to be able to provide operational and actionable advice. And which are the existing structure now in ICES? These are the single stock advice and the mixed fisheries considerations that are given every year. So the mixed fisheries models we use for both mixed fisheries considerations and also in the Seawise project follow the traditional MSE approach with the operating model and the management procedure. And the main difference is in the operating model, where we have multiple stocks and we have several fleets. And in most of the cases, we don't consider trophic interactions between stocks, and the interactions are only at a technical level. And then we put quite a lot of effort in describing the fishing activity as James was mentioning previously. And then in the management procedure, the management procedures work independently, stock by stock, and then in some cases we used multi-stock harvest control rules. So as said before, we put a lot of effort in describing the fishing activity. So in the highest level, we have the fleets that are formed by a group of vessels that share some common characteristics. And then we have the métiers that in principle are supposed to be formed by fishing operations that share the same catchability or similar catchability. But to be pragmatic and fit into the sampling programs, we define métiers based on gear used, mess size, season, and area, with the hope that this reflects the catchability and give us a quite homogeneous catchability among the fishing operations included there. And then we simulate three different processes. In the short term, we model how much effort do the fleets perform and how this effort is distributed across métiers. And then in the long term, we simulate the entry and exit of new vessels into the fishery and also technological improvements. In ICES, we started developing mixed fisheries advice or considerations in the early 2000 when the biomass of North Sea cod was at quite low level, and at the same time, the biomass of haddock was close to historical maximum. And these mixed fisheries considerations are now implemented in several regions and are uninformed about the choking effects at overall levels and also about choking effects at fleet level. So for example, in this graph, we saw the possible choking effects at a stock level, and we illustrated with several scenarios. So with this mean scenario, for example, we answered the question, what if the fleet stop fishing when the first quota is consumed? So in this case, what happens is that there is a loss in fishing opportunities for whiting and haddock, for example. And for plaice and cod, we can see how the amount of catch is almost equal to the TAC that is indicated with this horizontal line. So this means that in this case, plaice and cod are the choke stocks. And on the contrary, what would happen if the fleets continue fishing until the last quota is consumed? So in this case, we would have a big overshoot of the TAC of several stocks like cod or brill. And then we have we simulate also a quite useful scenario that is the status quo scenario, where the effort is kept equal to the most recent year or an average of recent levels. And in this case, we can see that this effort level is not that far from the minimum scenario. So we provide mixed fisheries considerations every year. And these mixed fisheries considerations are based on the ICES stock assessment and also on fleet and métier effort and catch data delivered annually by member states. And then the mixed fisheries working group condition the mixed fisheries models annually, and they follow a quite rigorous quality control process to ensure that the mixed fisheries model are consistent with the ICES stock assessment and the data. So on the one hand, this provides this with this we produce the mixed fisheries considerations every year, and on the other hand, it provides a valuable basis to run multi-stock and multi-fleet MSEs every year. So in Seawise, we have taken those models and have conditioned and developed them further to advance in the EBFM. So we have focused on the ecological effects on fisheries, ecological consequences of fisheries in the broad ecosystem. We have considered social and economic components, and we have simulated different management strategies and evaluate trade-offs. And how have we done it? Practically, we have included more processes into the mixed fisheries models, and we have developed new indicators. So we have included the impact of climate change in the growth, recruitment, and natural mortality of some stocks. Based on this work, we had the working group Eco MSE in May in ICES, and there we developed guidelines and tutorials for the incorporations of climate change into MSE, and then this material was used to give an online course. And then in terms of ecological consequences of fisheries, we have focused on the impact of fisheries in the benthic habitats and bycatch of TP species, threatened, endangered, and protected species. And then in socioeconomic terms, we started conditioning the economic part of the mixed fisheries models. Then in terms of presenting the results, we divide the fleets in large scale and small scale fisheries. We also include indicators about carbon emissions, and because of that, we looked at the fuel used and the cost of this fuel. Then we developed an indicator of a number of meals provided by the different fleets, and we started looking at communities. Then, as said before, we did test different management measures, looking at governance and analyzing trade-offs. Yeah. So now I will show some of the results we got for the different regions. In the rows, you have the different regions, and in the columns, different management scenarios. And in this first graph, we compare the situation today with the situation in the future and the three different management strategies: MSY, pretty good yield, and a status quo effort, and the three of them were combined with the landing obligation. So in most of the cases, the MSY scenario was able to achieve the MSY target, and the biomass was in most of the cases above the MSY trigger value. And then when we move to the pretty good yield scenario, the FMSY was not achieved in some cases, and the situation was worse in the status quo scenario. Then we look at the performance of the MSY and status quo management strategies using or under climate change. And the main conclusion in terms of biological component was that the MSY scenario was more resilient than the status quo one, because the biological indicators were better in this case. Then we also looked at the common fishery policy socioeconomic indicators for different region and management strategies. And in this case, we compared them with the business as usual scenario, so no climate change, and MSY with landing obligation management. So here for the North Sea, you can see how the MSY scenario is much better in socioeconomic terms for both fleets, but this was not the case in all the regions. For example, in the Bay of Biscay, the status quo effort was better in socioeconomic terms because the situation it's already relatively good. Then in the Bay of Biscay, we simulate a troll ban where the effort of trawlers was reduced by 50%. And what we saw in economic terms was that that the remaining fleets were not able to compensate for the loss in landings, but there was a fleet segment, the small-scale fisheries, that benefited from the reduction in the trawler in the effort of trawlers. Then here for the Celtic Sea, we can see also how in socioeconomic terms, also the MSY scenario is much better than the scenario under climate, than the scenario under status quo effort. And finally, we tested different gear modification and effort reduction in the Mediterranean, and we saw how the performance was different depending on the measure, and there were some differences among fleets too. And finally, we looked at the Marine Strategy Framework Directive indicators. That is a directive that looks at the ecosystem broadly. And in this case, I'm showing only 4 indicators, and you can see how the bycatch of TP species decreased significantly under various management scenarios, but the impact in other indicators was almost negligible. So to finish, I would like to reflect about what has worked and what hasn't. So first, we defined a large battery of indicators that provided a large coverage of the socioeconomical system. So I think that we did a big step in this sense. And then in terms of climate change, for some stocks, we found evidence of a climate change impact in the historical data. So we were able to forecast the impact of climate change for those stocks. But for many of the stocks, there was no clear evidence. So we were not able to forecast the potential impact of climate change. If we have used different type of models that rely, for example, in niche theory, maybe we could have been able to forecast the effort, even if we have not seen evidence yet. And I've not talked about the use of full ecosystem models, but we also did some work with these type of models. And in order to be able to combine indicators from ecosystem models and from mixed fisheries models, we try to condition them in a consistent way, or as consistent as possible. And in some regions, the conditioning was successful, and at the end we obtained quite consistent scenarios and results. So we were able to to provide combined a battery of combined indicators, but it was not possible in others. And this is something we should look more in deep in the future. And in terms of communities and social dimensions, we did good progress using existing databases to forecast the impact of management strategies inland, using land import as a proxy. And finally, in order to define some indicators, it was necessary to link the variables simulated in the mixed fisheries models with other elements in the ecosystem, for example, marine litter or bycatch of certain species. But in some cases, there was no relationship. We were not able to find an internal variable that was able to explain these components, so we were not able to calculate the an indicator for those components. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much. To finish, just to mention that we provided several online tutorials related to the evaluation of management strategies that can be found in the web page of the project. So if you are interested in conducting multi-stock and multi-fleet simulations, this could be helpful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dorletta. That was a super interesting presentation. All right, so that concludes our speaker presentations for today. We now have about 30 minutes or about 25 minutes now set aside for questions and discussion. So if you'd like to ask a question live, feel free to use the raise hand function and we'll call on you in order. Alternatively, you can submit your question in the chat box and we will read it from there. So open the floor for questions. And seeing none, if everyone's being shy, I can start us off with a question. Oh, Shuya, perfect. Go ahead, Shuya.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And thanks, first of all, Ocean Foundation for organizing for this interesting but challenging topic of multi-species MSE. And thanks all to the presenters for very interesting presentation. I have a couple of questions to Goka, if I may. So Goka, you in your presentation, you have a schematic figure how three MPs interact. And I actually have a couple questions, but my first question is when for the TAC advice, you said that not the TAC derived from the least F applied to maybe the F applied to the weakest stock, but you said TAC advice will be presented to the each separated management procedures. And I was wondering why that is a current plan, given that you have TAC based on the weakest stock. So I was a bit confused with that, and I have a follow-up question. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, and I tried also to clarify this yesterday in another meeting, panel one. The assumption that the fishing effort will constrain the catch of the other two stocks is something that we do in the simulations as they go forward. But in the moment that the TAC advice is provided every 3 years, this TAC is provided through independent management procedures. It's just that we assume that the TAC for the 3 stocks is not reachable. It's impossible to reach the 3 TACs. But the advice that will go to the Commission, that's why the slide says this is how it works in the simulations and this is how it works for the advice for the Commission, will come from 3 independent harvest control rules, 3 independent data surplus production model and harvest control rule for the 3 stocks. I'm not sure if this clarifies things. You are
Julia,
muted,
you're
Sia.
still muted.
Yeah, I'm gonna meet you, I guess, next week, so we need to talk furthermore. But my follow-up question is, when you present the result to the commission, I guess, next year, what's going to be presented? One of the presentation I saw in the yesterday's presentation, which I didn't, I just looked at it. It's for the results for Big Eye results. But I guess my first question is, you show that the shape of harvest strategies, harvest control rules, but I guess each species, each stock has different or separate harvest strategies. Are they supposed to have, I guess unnecessary, the same harvest control shape, or are you considering combination of those harvest control rules? And in addition, or kind of related, is how are you going to present the results to the commission, given that it's a, I guess it's kind of it is a multi-species stock. Then the commission is supposed to select a management procedure applicable. I mean, possibly in a different shape of HCRs, but I guess combination set of HCRs for all 3 species. And I was thinking how you can present that kind of selections to the commission. You have any ideas how are you going to present the results for 3 stocks and possibly trade-offs among them?
Yes, very good question, Tsuya. Initially, we are considering the same harvest control rules for the 3 stocks. The management procedures are similar. They are different in the CPUE they use. For Big Eye and Yellowfin, we mostly use the long line CPUE, but for poor seine, we use the CPUE from poor seiners. But we do assume that the harvest control rule, the combination of B trigger and F target, will be the same for the 3. But of course, we could change this and have different, let's say, for example, for skipjack, we may have a more aggressive F target or and a bit more precautionary for Big Eye, for example, or things like this. These are things that we could try, we could evaluate. And how we will present the results? Yes, we will present the results on the catch we estimate that we will see in the simulations, but also the different TACs that will be provided throughout the simulations. So at the end, the management procedures could be compared with both of them. And not only this, the idea is also that we also simulate what if the TAC of the 3 stocks would be reached as well. So we will still complement the results with this assumption that what if the commission, if you had perfect knowledge and control, you could fulfill the TAC as if there were not technical interactions in the simulations.
Great, thank you so much, Gorka. We'll move over to Dorleta. And Dorleta, you're muted.
Sorry, I have a question for Gorka related to the first question of Suya. You have, let's see if I have understood you well. You have said that in the operating model, the assumption is that the fleets do the lowest effort, the one that corresponds with the most restrictive quota, let's say. If so,
may not be the
if so, is not this too restrictive assumption, too optimistic, probably, in terms of biological performance?
It may not be that the most restrictive, because the TACs depend on the productivity. For example, for Big Eye,
I'm saying more restrictive in terms of the effort, not on the absolute level of the catch, but the
Yes.
most restrictive in terms of the effort this quota allows you to perform.
Yes. The idea is that, for example, if there was one stock that goes to a bad condition, that would constrain the fishing effort. And with that fishing effort, you will have to evaluate what would be the catch of the other two stocks. That's the idea, yes.
So you don't consider having alternative scenarios because I mean, in our experience, the performance of the management strategies are very dependent on the assumption you made about this. So, for example, now in Europe with the landing obligation, when we assume that the landing obligation is fully implemented, everything goes well because you stop fishing when the first of your quota is consumed. But if we move to alternative scenarios, the things do not work as well. So it's quite important, but we can talk about this internally.
What we are foreseeing now, I mean, because I have the same comment especially from operators, and what we have to see now is if we can still leave some options for example, because the operators sometimes can go to fishing areas or in different seasons where the proportion between the species is different. So, for example, if they would be reaching the TAC for big eyes soon, they could go to areas or to sets that where the proportion of skipjack and yellowfin is probably bigger. So we will leave some room to increase the catch, always within the TAC, but we will leave some option to increase the TAC a little bit beyond of the effort constraint. This is the thing we are foreseeing now for the next developments of the MSE.
Thank you, Gorka.
Any additional questions from attendees? I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So maybe while everyone thinks about any additional questions they might have, I'll pose one for all the panelists, and anyone can feel free to jump in and respond to this. So the question I have for you is, can you describe what it's like to try to balance management objectives for multi-stock MPs, and what does that process look like from both a scientific and management perspective? So again, any of you four, feel free to jump in. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, from a scientific perspective, I think fisheries science is exciting because it's so diverse, from statistics to talking to people that catch fish. And I think as far as learning about how fisheries are actually working, and I guess a related observation or question to others maybe would be how you see fishers actually responding indirectly. I know management procedures are kind of a top-down process of setting constraints on the fishery, but I was curious, for example, in the tropical Pacific, how much you see action by fishermen in response to anticipated management procedures that are not directly related. So I guess I'm not sure if I answered your question, Becky, but I am curious if Finley has any comments on how the fleets may be responding. Are FAD closures affecting big eye? I think that was one of and how much of that is I don't know about the MPs for skipjack, what's actually entailed, but presumably there's gear changes that are happening and those types of things. I wonder if that's something that could get some comments on.
Yeah, happy to say something. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so the interim management procedure for skipjack, which got agreed. Hang on, just take my camera on. There we go. In 2022, that sets an overall fishing effort for purse seine and doesn't distinguish between whether it's FAD or whether it's free school. And that was sort of a decision to try to keep that out of the management procedure and try to keep the management procedure process as simple as possible. And in doing so, sort of moving the other decision about how is effort then split between the FAD and the free school, that is handled through the implementing measure, which gets updated every few years as part of the commission process. So the way it's currently formulated, there isn't any explicit way of defining the split between FAD and free school effort within the Skipjack MP. As we are now working in earnest on the big eye management procedure, that becomes a sort of a bigger question, I think. I'm not sure that we're going to be in a place where, again, it gets formally considered. So there's some kind of rule setting that sort of FAD closure period or the split between FAD and free school. But it is something that needs to be considered, certainly when we're developing the big eye management procedure about, we've got to set up some plausible scenarios going forward into the future about, what if all of the fishing is on FAD? What if all of it is on free school? How do you build a management procedure that is going to be robust to that? And then I think importantly for us, really what monitoring is taking place, and how does that monitoring then feed into the implementing process? If that answers the question.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was curious about. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Finley. Any additional questions from the audience? If not, Gorka, I'll just ask you. Oh, perfect. Shia, again, go ahead.
Sorry, just quick clarification to Jim, and sorry, the last presenter from ICES. My question to them is, are those multi-species simulation results are used for actual TAC advice? Thank you to both of them.
I'll jump in. Our TAC advice is a very interactive process that happens at a high level for the council. We have a overarching council which we provide the science advice, and the decisions that they make on TACs happens evaluating trade-offs in a public setting. So in that sense, our simulations are not directly used there. How they are is when they wish to change some aspect of the regulations. And so that invokes a whole process of performing another environmental impact statement. And at that point, that's where we can use the simulation framework as a tool to see what the expected response might be by the ecosystem and by how fisheries act. Where we still have a difficulty, and I think it's a very intractable problem, is to really predict how industry or fishing fleets will modify their behavior given the suite of changes in front of them. And that was part of my inquiry before, was to see if we have lots of regulations in a lot of constraints, and in real time the fishing fleet has to respond in ways. And I was kind of curious to hear if there was concerns about the inability to do well. And I suspect Dorleta maybe has a similar issue in Europe with fleets being unable to catch their targets in the way they like.
Yeah, this is the case. And in case of ICES Northeast Atlantic, we need to distinguish. We have the mixed fisheries considerations and then the simulations I've been talking about. So in the case of mixed fisheries considerations, they are not directly used to set to provide the catch advice, but they are used to set the TACs. When the Commission and Norway or UK sets the TACs, they rely on mixed fisheries consideration. For example, if there is a choke stock that has been identified, or also for their own negotiations, if they see that one fleet will be hardly impacted by some catch advice, they give more flexibility to the TAC setting. So yeah, they are used. And then in terms of the simulations, they are not direct routes used. I could say they are set to inform strategic management, but they are not already used, hopefully in the coming years.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim and Zorletta. We have a few minutes left if anyone has any last minute questions. All right. Dorletta, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I
Go
was
for
not
it.
able to find the hand. I have a question for, sorry, I have a question
Yeah.
for Jim about the linear programming for the catch composition at material level. Well, maybe this is too technical, but I was wondering, what do you do there? Isn't a method to change the catchability of the material, so there is some flexibility on the catch composition, or what is the aim of this linear programming?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Not to get too technical, it is a basic approach to where you have a system where there's lots of constraints, and it comes from it seemed like a good approach. It actually has some problems on a technical level. It's if you talk to people that are familiar with the literature and economics, I think it's been used quite a bit. It has a problem of finding some solutions that are not very tractable, and so it does take some tending to make sure that, for example, bycatch species don't have any value in our system. In fact, you might consider them negative, but they're if you let everything go, it turns out that our pot fishery that catches groundfish in traps, basically, is the cleanest. And so if you didn't have constraints, then it would just say, oh, let's just fish with traps, with pots, and that would be the optimal way, but it's completely impractical. So it's not a perfect technique, but it was a good way to easily add in. There were lots and lots of constraints, meaning by gear type and areas, in addition to different species.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have just 1 minute left. So with that last minute, we'd just like to once again thank our wonderful panel of experts for their presentation today and for sharing all of your knowledge and perspectives. We'd also like to thank our project advisory committee who has helped shape the agenda for today and who continue to support all of our work under this project. And of course, we're grateful to our partners at Pew and the FAO Common Oceans team and to the Global Environment Facility for making all this work possible. And a special thanks, of course, to our interpreters. You guys are fantastic. And to all of you who joined from all the different time zones around the world today. So the recording of today's session will be available soon on our YouTube channel via harveststrategies.org. And so with that, thank you guys so much again for attending, and goodbye for now.
Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, bye.